Okay, so in this module we are going to discuss, this is the second module of our lecture. In this module we are going to discuss the reproduction. In the first module we saw what is lifespan, different terms associated with the lifespan, which were the maximum lifespan, then average lifespan, then what is life expectancy. Now we are moving to the second module of this lecture, which is about the reproduction, and reproduction is the theme of this chapter. So first of all, let us define what is reproduction. I would like you to take out pen and paper and write down along with me, because you are going to appear for the boards exams, and there you will have to give the short notes on if you are asked to write down the short notes of asexual reproduction. Still you will have to start with the basic definition of reproduction. The good notes is that one which starts from the basic. So please write down the definition of reproduction. What is reproduction? So reproduction is a biological process in which an organism, whenever I am saying organism, you have to consider it is the living organism, because reproduction is one of the characteristic features of the living organisms only. So reproduction is a biological process, here it should be process. Biological process in which an organism produces another organism similar to itself. So this is the definition according to your NCERT book. Next, since you are class 12 senior students, so you need to know a technical definition, or how can you define reproduction in another way. So reproduction is a mechanism adopted by nature to ensure the continuity of species generation after generation. So from this definition you can understand that what is the need for reproduction to happen. What is the need for the reproduction to happen? So the need is that, suppose there is a dog which is born because of the evolution. There is one single dog which is born because of the evolution. So after a certain period of time, after completing its lifespan, the dog will die. After that, if there is no provision of reproduction, if reproduction is not existing there, so what will happen? If that one dog species is dying, if that one individual is dying, then there is no another dog on this planet Earth. But the mother nature does not want this to happen. The mother nature wants all the species to exist on this planet Earth. So to ensure this continuity of life, so that when one dog individual is dying, there should be another dog individual which will then continue its lifespan. Then there will be second dog generation which will continue its lifespan, and so on. The dog species will live forever on this planet Earth until and unless any natural calamity occurs and the whole Earth is destroyed. So this is the purpose of reproduction. The purpose of reproduction is to ensure the continuity of species generation after generation. Now when you are giving your short notes in your boards exam, please write down this definition, because this definition is a general definition given in your NCERT book. So all the students are going to write this one. But when you have to write something for getting better marks, you have to write something extra. So this thing is the proper definition, a mechanism adopted by nature to ensure the continuity of a species generation after generation. Now we are moving to the next topic, which is the types of reproduction. How many types of reproduction are there? Or the modes of reproduction. The mode of reproduction. So you already know it can be either asexual reproduction or it can be sexual reproduction. Either asexual or sexual. So in the asexual, as you know, there is involvement of a single parent and no gamete formation. No gamete formation happens in case of asexual reproduction. Now we are going to discuss this asexual reproduction in a little bit of greater detail. Okay, fine. I am going to write out there. Hope it will be visible to you. So in the asexual reproduction, the first thing you have to know that what are clones. This term is mentioned in your NCERT and you can be asked to define clones in your board's exam. So what are clones? So in the asexual reproduction, the young ones which are produced, they are identical to themselves. Young ones produced during the asexual reproduction are identical to themselves as well as to their parent. I am taking the example of plants in this case. For asexual reproduction, I am taking the example of plants. Suppose there is a pea plant, and it is undergoing vegetative propagation. It is better that we take a more appropriate example because we have studied pea plant with respect to the sexual reproduction. So let us here consider the exact example of vegetative reproduction. So there is a plant named bryophyllum. Bryophyllum does what? How does this bryophyllum reproduces? So the leaf of the bryophyllum sprouts the roots, and then that root containing part of the leaf further develops into a new bryophyllum plant. So this type of reproduction is vegetative propagation, and this vegetative propagation is one of the examples of asexual reproduction. Not examples, but one type of asexual reproduction. So this vegetative reproduction is a type of asexual reproduction. So in this condition, if there is a bryophyllum plant and here the roots start originating, then yet another plant starts developing on this particular leaf itself. This is the leaf of the bryophyllum. There is the rooting happening, then the leaves develop, and this is a new plant arising from the leaf of the parent plant. So this particular plant, and suppose there is one more plant developing here. So these two progenies will be identical to one another, will be similar to one another, and these two will be similar to this particular parent plant also. So these two which are similar to one another and which are similar to the parent plant also, these two are termed as a clones. So one of the features of asexual reproduction is that the offspring produced are identical to themselves as well as they are identical to their parents, and they are termed as the clones. So this identical thing, when I am saying identical means similar. So this similarity is on what basis? Similarity is on what? Suppose you and your brother are there. So if you two look similar, you can someone can say that you are similar. Or if you two eat the same type of fruits, or if you two like the same type of colors, so someone can say that you are similar in your choices. So these are the two bases of similarity. Like one person can say you two similar on the basis of your appearance, and the another person can say you two people to be similar on the basis of your fooding habit or the color choices and other things. So these are the criteria of being identical. So these two criteria, in terms of biology, we can say that they are genetic similarity and, let us say it first, second, genetic similarity and morphological similarity. Morphological similarity. So if an individual is genetically similar as well as morphologically similar, those two individuals will be termed as identical. So the clones are genetically similar and morphologically similar. The clones are genetically similar as well as the morphologically similar. Genetically, you will understand in later chapters in which you are going to study genetics, which is a part of biology, in a greater detail. So this was about the asexual reproduction. Then there are certain structures associated with the asexual reproduction. I have already told that there is no gamete formation. So what does happens to give rise to a new individual? What happens to give rise to a new individual? So there are certain asexual structures. Certain asexual structures responsible for the asexual reproduction to happen. So the examples of such asexual structures are zoospores, then gamules. So you can consider these as the little bit of similarity with the gametes. So these are the structures which will help the parent organism to pass its information for the generation of a new individual. So zoospores. Zoospores are motile structures. Motile structures and found in an algae which is named cladophora. Cladophora. So these zoospores are found in cladophora, which is an algae, and zoospores are a motile structures. Motile means that have the capacity to move from one place to another. Next example of asexual structures is gamules. So gamules are found in sponges. Another asexual reproductive structures can be tubers. So tubers are found in potato. Then are runners, suckers, rhizome. All these are the asexual structures which will help in the asexual reproduction. Okay, so let us move towards the sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is very much easier, very much simple, and this is why the asexual reproduction is found only in the lower phylum of the plants and animals. For example, they are found in the Monera and Protista. These two phylum have the asexual mode of reproduction. So what happens in these phylum is the asexual reproduction is simply cell division. For example, if we take Protista, so in Protista we are taking an example of amoeba. Amoeba is what? Amoeba is a single-celled organism. So how does amoeba undergoes the asexual reproduction? In the amoeba, suppose this is one amoeba. There is a nucleus, there will be cytoplasm. So when this amoeba gets older, it will simply divide its cytoplasm. And also the nucleus. So two amoeba are formed from one. So there was one amoeba, then it undergoes the cell division from here. This is the nucleus. Since this is a prokaryote, so there is no any predefined or well-defined nucleus. There will be simply the genetic material, something will be there. So this undergoes this binary fission, it divides into two halves, and these two daughter amoeba are formed. Daughter amoeba are formed. So in this mode of reproduction, what has happened? Simple binary fission has occurred. So what is binary fission? So binary fission is an example of asexual reproduction in case of Protista and Monera. So binary means two, fission means breaking down. So breaking down of one amoeba into two daughter amoebae is termed as binary fission. The same way what happens in case of Monera. Monera is represented by bacteria. So bacteria is again a simple organism, prokaryotic organism. In the bacteria, again the same binary fission happens. There is one bacteria. It breaks into two. two daughter bacteria. So here also the binary fission is taking place, which is one of the examples of asexual reproduction. So this is how the asexual reproduction happens. In case of lower animals, that is Monera and Protista, it is a simple cell division, but in case of other a little bit higher organisms such as plants, simple plants, it happens through spatial structures that I have already told. The spatial structures, asexual structures such as zoospores. Zoospores are mainly found in algae and fungi. And in case of simple plants, the asexual structures are tubers, runners, suckers, etc. So now we are moving to the second topic, which is sexual reproduction. Now this one is finished. Now we are going to focus on the sexual reproduction. So the sexual reproduction is quite complex. It is more complex than the asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is more complex, and hence it happens in higher eukaryotic organisms. Eukaryotic organisms. So in the higher eukaryotic organisms, there are specific structures which help in the sexual reproduction. So this sexual reproduction is more complex, therefore it requires a proper organ system. Then there is a proper mechanism of it to happen, and it is found in the higher eukaryotic organisms. So whichever organism is undergoing the sexual reproduction, its lifespan is divided into three phases. Three phases are there in the lifespan of those complex eukaryotic organisms which will undergo the sexual reproduction. So the first stage is juvenile phase. Juvenile phase is the first phase in case of higher eukaryotic organism, stages of life. You have understood what is lifespan. So in that lifespan, we are going to see three different phases. First phase is juvenile phase. Second phase is the reproductive phase. Third phase is the senescence. Senescent phase, you can say. Senescent phase or the old age. You can see a fourth stage also in some books, and this fourth one is nothing but death. So death I am not considering as the stage of life. Death is not the stage of life. Therefore, I am just telling you the three phases. First one is juvenile phase, second is reproductive phase, third is the senescent phase. So what is juvenile phase? This thing you can be asked to define in 2 marks questions in your board's exam. Let us see what is juvenile phase. Juvenile phase. Well, human beings are the higher eukaryotic organism, the highest eukaryotic organism, the highly evolved eukaryotic organism is the human being. So here, when I said higher eukaryotic organism, although there can be many eukaryotic organisms such as dog, cat, plants, anything. But here to explain you the juvenile phase, I am taking an example of human beings itself. What does happens during the human being phase of life? Initially, when the children are growing up to a certain stage, the girls and boys are similar. They are same. Their body structure is same. Their voice is same. Their almost all the characteristics are childish. But after attaining a certain age, we can see the differentiation between girls and boys. So that particular stage, the stage of, not the stage, let us consider it the period of life up to which an eukaryotic higher organism attains the reproductive capacity. The reproductive capacity up to which, means in the initial phases, the higher eukaryotic organisms are not prepared to undergo reproduction. So the initial phases, the beginning of the life, when the organism is not reproductively active, that particular phase of life, this phase in the complete lifespan of a particular organism is termed to be the juvenile phase. So dear students, I have already told you that you are going to appear for the boards exam. So please take out your pen and paper, keep it whenever you are attending my lecture, so that you can write down whatever I am writing here. When you are writing and listening at the same time, the mind has got a better capability to keep the things memorized for longer time. Instead of that, if you are just simply seeing the lecture and you are just waiting that you will take the screenshot, then even I know that where the screenshot goes. Like a screenshot will be kept in the phone's gallery, and it is of no use to you if you are not opening it, and if you are not writing it, and if you are not making the notes. You cannot recall it during your exam time. Therefore, please, it's my request to you all that please write it down. Next, we are moving to the reproductive phase. So before moving to the reproductive phase, let me mention the juvenile phase as in case of plants. So juvenile phase in case of plants is termed as vegetative phase. In case of animals, this is juvenile phase. In case of plants, this is vegetative phase. So since I told you that vegetative phase or juvenile phase is the period up to which the organism is growing and maturing for the reproductive phase. So this way, there is an example of a plant which is Strobilanthes kunthiana. Strobilanthes kunthiana. This is a plant. Its vernacular name, vernacular means common name. Vernacular name is Neelkuranji. Neelkuranji. In India, it is termed, this particular plant is known as Neelkuranji. So what happens in this plant? Why am I quoting it as separate example to explain the juvenile phase is that this Strobilanthes kunthiana has a juvenile phase is very long, and it flowers only after 12 years. after 12 years. After 12 years. Flowering after 12 years. It flowers. So flowering in case of Strobilanthus kuntiana takes place in 12 years. So flowering is what? Flowering in case of plants is the reproductive phase. Flowering. Flowering means that particular plant is reproductively mature now. So if I am saying that this particular plant will flower after 12 years, it means that you can question what is that plant doing up to 12 years? Why cannot it flower until 12 years? So that is a different mechanism which you will get to know in your bachelor's program whenever you will be taking the botany courses or like that. But for here, the thing that you have to understand is, if you are writing down the short notes, or if you have to define the juvenile phase in your board's exam, you will give the definition. In case of plants, you will say it is vegetative phase. Now you will quote one example. This is Strobilanthus kuntiana, whose vegetative phase is of 12 years. Vegetative phase is very long, and that takes up to 12 years, 12 long years. There is one more example, which is bamboo. Bamboo plant flowers only once. Flowers only once in its lifetime. Only once in its lifetime. In its lifetime. And the lifetime of bamboo plant is approx 100 years. So that bamboo plant is flowering just once in its lifetime. So this is also an example of a long vegetative phase or long juvenile phase. Now we have to move finally to the reproductive phase. So in case of higher eukaryotes, there are 3 phases in their lifespan. First one is the juvenile phase, second one is the reproductive phase, third one is the senescent phase. We have completed the juvenile phase. Now we are going to take up the reproductive phase. So reproductive phase we have to study with respect to the sexual reproduction. This is our main topic. Later we have discussed the stages. Now we are discussing the vegetative phase. Vegetative phase of the sexual reproductive phase. Reproductive phase in case of sexual reproduction. So what happens is that there are certain phenomenon occurring inside the organisms in order to make them reproductively mature. Certain phenomenon is going inside the organism to make them reproductively mature. So what are those phenomenon? What can be those phenomenon? Those phenomenon can be changes in ovary, hormone secretion, phenotypic means something that you can see in the organism. Phenotypic you can relate with the morphogenetic. Morphological. Phenotypic means morphological, that you can see in a living organism. So the changes, the phenomenon which is undergoing inside a certain eukaryotic organism in order to make it reproductively mature can be what? Can be the changes in the ovary, first thing. Second, some hormone secretions. Third thing, phenotypic maturation of genitalia. So genitalia is the reproductive organ inside the eukaryotic organisms. Say for example, if I am taking example of human beings as the highest eukaryotic organism, so the genitalia in case of human beings will mature in order to attain the reproductive maturity. So this is about the maturation. Reproductive phase consists of maturation. Certain type of phenomenon happen. In those phenomenon, I have mentioned few things. Changes in the ovary happens, hormone secretion happens, then phenotypic maturation of genitalia happens, etc. Now just focus on the changes in the ovary. Changes in the ovary. So based on the changes in the ovary, there are two types of cycles existing in sexual reproductive organisms. The two types of cycles that happen in case of sexual reproduction are, the first one is menstrual cycle, and the second one is Estrus cycle. Estrus cycle. So menstrual cycle and the Estrus cycle are what? They are the cycles, or they are the phenomenon for maturation of ovary. Maturation of ovary. When ovary is maturing, it will undergo the menstrual cycle, either menstrual cycle or estrous cycle. So maturation of ovary consists of certain processes which are considered as menstrual cycle and the estrous cycle. Now when does the menstrual cycle happens? Where does the menstrual cycle happens? In which organisms does the menstrual cycle happens, and in which organism does the estrous cycle happen? So menstrual cycle happens in primates. In primates. Primates is what? You have studied the classification of human beings. In that you might have studied class, order, family, genus, and then species. So species is sapiens, genus is Homo, family is Hominidae, and order is Primata. So this thing, order Primata, this is one of the taxa in the classification of higher eukaryotes. So order Primata. So whichever animals will be belonging to this order, those organisms will be called as primates. For example, human beings are primates. Human beings are primates. Humans, apes, and monkeys. All these are the primates. So the menstrual cycle happens only in the primates. Primates example is humans, apes and monkeys. They have menstrual cycle. Next one is the Estrus cycle. Estrus cycle happens in the non-primates. All the orders except the order Primata. There are various orders of the eukaryotic organisms. So, happens in non-primates. Non-primates, for example, dogs, cows, sheep, etc. So these organisms undergo the Estrus cycle. So if you have to define menstrual cycle or the Estrus cycle, you can say that they are the cyclical changes in the function of ovary. They are the cyclical changes. Cyclical changes in the function of ovary. Function of ovary. Whatever function the ovary plays, that function undergoes a cyclical change. So what is important for your boards and NEET exam is that to understand the differences between these two. The first difference, you have seen that menstrual cycle occurs in primates, Estrus cycle happens in the non-primates. So what are the other differences? Because when you are asking the question, you have to give at least 4-5 points in that. And if you are appearing for NEET exam, there will be various statements. Out of that, you will have to choose which all applies to menstrual cycle and which applies to the Estrus cycle. So, the differences. Let us see the differences. Difference number 1. Differences. Number 1 is, okay, fine. Let us make 2 separate columns. 2 separate columns in order to differentiate menstrual cycle and the Estrus cycle. Okay, so we are going to discuss the differences between Estrus cycle and the menstrual cycle. So Estrus cycle and menstrual cycle are what? They are the cyclical changes in the function of ovary. So let us see what is the difference. So Estrus cycle, as I have already told, that Estrus cycle occurs in non-primates. The organisms, the animals other than the primata order. Non-primates are those organisms which are outside the order primata. So Estrus cycle happens in the non-primates, while the menstrual cycle occurs in primates. Then no bleeding takes place in case of Estrus cycle, whereas in case of menstrual cycle, bleeding from female genitalia occurs. Female genitalia occurs. Bleeding happens from the female genitalia in case of menstrual cycle. Primates, I have given the example: humans, apes and monkeys. Humans and apes and monkeys are primates. So in those primates, there will be bleeding from female genitalia at one particular time of the month. Then in the Estrus cycle, there is no bleeding. In non-primates, you can take example of cows, sheep, etc. Dogs even. Yeah, so let's Take the example, dogs, cows, sheep, etc. are non-primates. In non-primates, there is no bleeding. The third difference is, in case of Estrus cycle, the endometrium is reabsorbed inside the body, reabsorbed inside the female body, reabsorbed. Now what is endometrium? Endometrium is one of the lining of uterus. Uterus is what? Uterus is the part of female reproductive system in case of higher eukaryotes, in case of placental mammals. So uterus is the part of reproductive system in the females. So there are three linings in this particular uterus. You have already studied about the stomach and the different layers, mucosa, submucosa and all those. So in the same way you can see there is uterus, and uterus is lined by three layers. The innermost one is the endometrium. Middle one is the myometrium. And the outermost one is the endometrium. So endometrium, this endometrium in case of Estrus cycle gets reabsorbed. Now let's see what happens to the endometrium in case of menstrual cycle. So the endometrium is flown out along with the blood. In the earlier points you have seen that there is bleeding that occurs in menstrual cycle. Then this bleeding also carries the broken part of the endometrium. The endometrium gets broken down and it comes into the blood, and then it is flown out from female genitalia through female genitalia. This endometrium is flown out through the female genitalia in case of the menstrual cycle, whereas the endometrium in case of Estrus cycle gets reabsorbed. It is not flown out because there is no bleeding. Next difference between Estrus cycle and menstrual cycle is that those females which are undergoing Estrus cycle will have high urge for copulation or mating, and they are said to be in heat period. You would have seen in case of cows that there are certain heat period in which those cows can be taken for mating. But in case of menstrual cycle, the opposite happens. The females which will have menstrual cycle do not have urge for copulation or mating. So these are the four differences in the Estrus cycle and the menstrual cycle. So now we have to proceed to the next topic of this module. Hope you all are getting up to here. You have understood everything. Bio is an interesting subject. If you really want to know about the living world and the processes happening inside them. But if you are studying just for the sake of giving exams, then bio will seem to be very much boring, because everything is theoretical here. You don't have to solve anything, but you have to memorize everything. So this is why the bio may seem a boring subject if you are just studying it for the sake of appearing to the exams and qualifying it, or passing it with higher scores. So the best thing is that just take interest in bio and arouse your curiosity about what is happening in the living world. Since you also are living, so just study the chapter in relation with one another and just see where do you stand, where do the human beings stand in that. So this was my second module. We have to proceed to the next topic of the module.